It's that time again. Last year, I made the brown sugar milk tea mooncake, inspired by the brown sugar milk tea. This one is inspired by the lavender matcha from Starbucks. We're gonna turn it into mooncake form, and I'm gonna give you a recipe for both the Snowskin and baked traditional version using the same filling so that you can have the best of both worlds and pick whichever one you wanna make. First, the Snowskin. You always want to make a Snowskin before the filling because this requires a couple hours to firm up in the fridge before we can actually use it. The longer you chill Snowskin, the less sticky it gets. So if you have the time, you can even make this the day before so that the Snowskin can stay in the fridge overnight. So to make the batter, combine the glutinous rice flour, icing sugar, cornstarch, and good quality matcha powder. Give that a quick mix. And then it gives the wet ingredients, which is the milk, melted butter. I melted this a little while ago so that it has a bit of a chance to cool down. If you add hot butter straight to the cold milk, it's going to seize up and form clumps, and you're not going to have as smooth of a batter. Also add in the sweetened condensed milk. And then we mix until smooth. To cook the Snowskin, if you've seen any of my 8 years worth of mooncakes, I've always steamed my Snowskin over the stove, using a pot or a steamer, and it's been fine. There's always been people who've been telling me to just microwave it, but I was like, no, it works. But I no longer have my steamer with me, and I've been making smaller and smaller portions, so I finally tried microwaving it. And it is easier, it is faster, and it yields fairly consistent results, so that's what we'll do. So I'm transferring the batter into a shallow bowl like this, and you can pass this through a sieve if you'd like, but I've never really had issues with clumps, so I'm just gonna pour this straight in. And then this is gonna go into the microwave for 1 minute increments. It's the same technique if you've ever made mochi before. Then we're gonna take this out and give it a good stir, just to help it cook evenly. Then this goes back in and you just keep going until there's no more liquid left, and that means it's completely cooked. It usually just takes me 2 or 3 minutes. But depending on the size of your bowl and also the power of your microwave, it could vary, so just keep an eye on it. And once it's cooked, you want to use a sturdy spatula to continue kneading the dough. The goal behind kneading this is to even out its texture because you want a really smooth Snowskin. So we're mixing any oils that may have separated during cooking or clumps that may have formed in the microwave back into itself. And you want to keep going until the surface of this dough looks shiny but almost matte at the same time. It should just look really even. You could also use a piece of plastic wrap and then knead this by hand, because once the dough starts to cool down, it gets a little bit stiffer, so it might become a bit tough to use a spatula. And once it becomes smooth and shiny, wrap it up tightly and place into the fridge to chill for a couple hours. On to making the filling. As you know, this is a lavender filling, and the base for this filling is made of taro. It's a bit of an odd pairing, but I'm very proud of myself for coming up with it because taro has like a really subtle and mellow flavor that I feel like perfectly complements lavender, and the texture is really lovely to work with. So it's a very straightforward filling, and we're gonna get started with the lavender portion. Make sure you do this first because once you cook the taro, it needs to be like mixed right away. So I'm using culinary grade lavender flowers. This is edible. Make sure you're not buying the kind that's meant for soaps and decor. In order to extract the maximum flavor from the lavender flowers, I'm going to break it down in a food processor along with some sugar. If you don't have a food processor, you can also just rub the sugar and the lavender flowers with your fingers. You might see this technique done with citrus zests. It helps draw out any of the oils and the flavor from the lemon zest before it gets mixed into the batter. So kind of the same principle here. And then for maximum extraction of flavor, I'm also going to add some hot milk to this. It's kind of turning this into a lavender syrup, and this overall mixture is just going to be a lot easier to combine with the rest of the ingredients afterwards. Then just a couple more ingredients. We're also going to add in the sweetened condensed milk, melted butter,
and just a small pinch of salt. And then mix until completely smooth. Now we can move on to the taro portion. So I have a chunk of taro here, giving it a quick rinse and then peeling away the peel. Try to wear gloves if you're able to, because raw taro can sometimes make your skin itchy. And once that's ready to go, you want to cut it up into nice and small cubes.
Since I've committed to microwaving as opposed to steaming, we're going to do the same for the taro. So I cut them into really small cubes, and I'm transferring it into the same shallow dish as I did with the Snowskin. I'm just weighing out how much we need for the recipe. This is the star of my purple sweet potato mooncakes. We're adding some here purely for aesthetic purposes. I want a really nice contrast between the purple and the green, but the lavender flowers we're using doesn't actually give off a very strong purple color. So this is my natural food dye of choice. You can also use actual food coloring if you'd like. You can add as much or as little as you'd like, depending on your preference for the intensity of the filling, and then we're gonna cook this all together.
Before cooking, drizzle over some cold water.
This is what's going to create that steaming effect in the microwave, because the water is going to end up evaporating while it's cooking. The amount of time it takes for this to cook depends on the size you cut your taro. The smaller it is, the faster it'll cook.
And I like to cover this up with a plate. You can also use plastic wrap, and this just traps the steam within and keeps the taro moist. Into the microwave this goes. I microwave it first for 6 minutes. Take it out, be careful because it is going to be really steamy, and just give it a light mix to make sure that all the taro is being microwaved evenly. There should still be a good amount of water left over. Then the plate goes on, and back into the microwave this goes for another 6 minutes. By the end, there shouldn't be any more excessive liquid left over in this bowl, and the taro should be incredibly soft and tender. When you poke it with a fork, it should pretty much just fall apart. So it should be very easy just to mash everything up until it is smooth. Then to complete the filling, we're going to pour in that lavender mixture that we had earlier.
Be careful not to overmix it, because there's a lot of starch in taro, and when you overwork those starches, it kind of turns into a bit of a runny and gluey texture, and it's not really possible to salvage that, sort of like when you overwork mashed potatoes. So use more of a pressing motion when you can. It's gonna look like the liquid is too much for this filling, but don't worry, the taro will absorb all of it, and sooner or later you're gonna end up with a nice and firm doughy texture. Now that the filling is ready, I'm going to portion it into 25-gram pieces so that it can go into the fridge to chill. This recipe makes 12 50-gram mooncakes, so both the skin and the filling are 25 grams each, but you can adjust that ratio depending on the size of your mooncake mold. The taro filling is very easy to work with. It's already quite firm and it's not sticky at all, so I just chill this for about half an hour to an hour. Before we can assemble these mooncakes, I'm just going to quickly microwave some glutinous rice flour so that it's heat treated and safe to eat right away, because we're going to use it as a dusting powder to avoid the Snowskin from sticking. Microwave this for 2 minutes, and I like to give it a stir halfway through just so it's cooked evenly, and it should start to smell a little bit nutty. Got the chilled skin and the chilled filling.
So we can begin putting everything together. You want to portion out the Snowskin into 25-gram pieces as well. Give it a quick knead to even out the texture, and then you want to dust it very lightly in that cooked glutinous rice flour so it doesn't stick. Then flatten the Snowskin until it becomes slightly wider than the filling itself. Then grab a piece of the taro lavender filling, place it into the center of the Snowskin, and seal it very carefully. You want to make sure there are no air pockets between the skin and the filling. Dust it generously with the glutinous rice flour so this doesn't stick to the mold when you stamp it, and just shape it slightly into a cylinder.
I'm using a 50-gram mooncake mold. This one's a lotus flower. And the way to assemble it is you just pop the stencil into the mold. Then you have the part that sticks out from the stencil itself. You twist the handle to lock it, and then you'll be able to stamp the mooncake. The Snowskin mooncakes have a much shorter shelf life because it starts to dry out and harden a few days after it's been made. So I recommend making this as close to when you're ready to eat it. You want to store this in a really airtight container and in the fridge to slow down the drying out process. Now I'm going to show you how to make the traditional baked version of these mooncakes using the same taro filling. We're just going to make a different crust.
First, prep the baking tray by lining it with a piece of parchment paper and preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Then to make the dough, mix together the pastry flour, matcha powder, and just a little bit of salt. Then for the wet ingredients, we have the syrup. You can also use a mixture of honey and water, some flavorless oil, and then mix this together until it becomes emulsified. Then all that's left to do is to add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients and fold it in. Try your best not to overmix. It's going to look a little bit sticky at first, but if you keep going, it's going to form a perfect dough. The assembly process is pretty much the exact same as the Snowskin mooncakes. Weigh out the filling and the skin to be 25 grams each. Assemble it up, and then make sure you seal this extra tight because if this leaks while it's baking, the mooncake will crack, which you don't want. And since there's a good amount of oil in this dough, it shouldn't be sticky at all, so you don't need to dust it before stamping. And I like to stamp this directly onto the baking tray lined with parchment paper so that you don't have to move the mooncake around any further afterwards, which is just a good way to make sure all the designs and the lines are extra sharp. Once everything is stamped out, this is ready to be baked in your preheated oven. You want to start off for 5 minutes, and in the meantime, we're going to quickly make an egg wash. So I'm only using the egg white portion. Add a little bit of water to the egg white and mix it to loosen it up in ideally a larger bowl than the one that I chose. Then once the mooncakes have baked for 5 minutes, you can see the color will be slightly lighter around the edges. Brush on a very thin layer of the egg wash. Be careful not to put on too much at once because if this floods into all of the fine lines of the design, it's going to disappear after it bakes. And then this goes back into the oven for another 5 minutes until it is just ever so slightly golden brown on top.
The traditional mooncakes are pretty much the exact opposite from the Snowskin. You don't want to eat it right away because as soon as it comes out of the oven, the crust is actually really dry and hard. For the first night, keep it in an airtight container and just let it sit at room temperature because then all of the moisture and the oils from within the filling are going to kind of seep into the crust. This process is called 回油 in Chinese. And then the next day when you open it up again, it's going to be a completely transformed texture. And then after that, it's good to eat pretty much for a whole week. I still like to keep it in an airtight container in the fridge, but you can let it come to room temperature before you eat it or even heat it up. If you like these mooncakes and you want to try out a couple of different flavors, I've made more than I can remember at this point, so I've linked them all in the description for you. And happy Mid-Autumn Festival!